At the start of the movie, a high school senior named Jong Don-bi sleeps her way through math class until her name gets called to solve a dreaded equation on the chalkboard. Her teacher sighs when she can't solve the math problem and reminds her that the college entrance exam is tomorrow. At home, Don-bi lazes around on the couch, and when her mom nags her about not having a goal in life, she storms out of the house to meet her friend So-hyun. Don-bi sighs with her friend, wishing she could just disappear. It's the college entrance exam day, and Don-bi races out the door. She's so engrossed in cramming for the test that she leaves her umbrella behind on the bus and ends up at the school soaking wet from the rain. The pressure mounts as she gets closer to the school gate. However, in a state of panic, she runs away and ends up sitting alone in a playground as the rain keeps pouring down on her. Suddenly, the sound of a beating drum thunders in the distance, and Don-bi seems to sense something strange about a puddle of rain nearby. She peers inside, and it's like a window that looks down into another world. Inside the puddle, a whole new world exists. There is a ritual taking place in a palace, with people praying for rain to fall from the sky. Don-bi carefully dips a toe into the puddle and gasps when her whole foot sinks in. On the other side, the wind kicks up, and one tiny droplet of rain falls from the sky into a ritual cup. And then, down comes Don-bi. The king Lee-do asks if she's a goblin or a human, and Don-bi simply says that she's a high school senior, or Gosam for short. However, the king interprets Gosam as a castrated man, or eunuch. Just then, Don-bi recognizes one of the king's eunuchs as her high school math teacher, but he doesn't seem to recognize her. In the next scene, Don-bi somehow manages to escape from the place. She grabs the scholar's robe and draws on a quick mustache to blend in. Meanwhile, we see that the queen's father is an ambitious man. He encourages her to have a son and secure the family's royal position. Surprisingly, it turns out that Don-bi's best friend So-hyun is actually Queen So-hyun in this world. On the other hand, King Lee-do is convinced that math and science are the keys to bettering his kingdom, but he is also upset that his best mathematicians can't even solve the Pythagorean theorem. At the same time, Don-bi is discovered by a nameless swordsman who reports to the king. She is dragged to a quiet place where the king is waiting to meet with her. He thinks her clothing is strange and wonders if she came from China. Don-bi responds that she came from the future and can tell him everything about it. She further says that she's good at everything, including math. That piques the king's interest, but Don-bi becomes nervous because it is a flat-out lie. Next, he presents her with the Pythagorean theorem, but she sighs when she sees that it's written in Hanja, traditional Chinese letters, which she can't read. However, she recognizes the formula and solves it pretty handily. Amazed at her work, the king declares that she can go back when the rain comes, and he'll clear her of all charges if she shares her knowledge with him. He then rewards her with a big piece of gold. In the next scene, the swordsman gives her a modest room to stay in and a cup for her drinking water. The next day, Don-bi is fitted for a eunuch's robe. She asks the eunuch's teacher why she can't have a pretty skirt, and he gives her a pep talk that being castrated doesn't mean he's still not a man. That's the first time Don-bi realizes that everyone thinks she's a dude. Hence, she just decides to roll with it because it ought to be easier to get by as a man. Her first order of business is to teach King Lee-do his first math lesson. But the problem is that he doesn't know Arabic numerals, so she begins to teach him the basics. The king spends his days in court memorizing the multiplication table. One day during practice, they're interrupted by the arrival of the queen. Don-bi is shocked to recognize her best friend's face, though of course in this world, she's the queen. Later that night, when Don-bi's stomach growls, the king enjoys teasing her with his food. She grumbles at him for eating all his food with a golden spoon, when his people don't even have enough drinking water. She also offers to show him how great peasant food can be. Don-bi then busts out a package of instant noodles from her backpack. The king is blown away by the taste and gulps it all down, though the next morning there's a raging rebellion in his intestines, and he's convinced that she tried to poison him. Don-bi tries to explain that it's just a stomach ache and tries to show him where his major organs are, like his heart starts beating faster when he likes someone. Lee-do doesn't know what she means, but nonetheless, he takes her to the royal doctor so that she can teach them all about the major organ systems. Thanks to her, a series of major medical texts are written about these discoveries. As the days pass by, Don-bi and the king become fast friends, as she teaches him about every useful thing she can think of. For all their hard work in advancing science, the scholars and Don-bi are awarded a single tangerine each, and she tucks hers away in her robe. The king saves an extra one to give to Don-bi and proudly offers it to her. One day, the queen's father hatches a plan to drug the king's dinner so that she can seduce him. However, the plan goes sideways when the king gives his dinner to Don-bi. Not knowing this, the queen comes into the king's chamber and starts to undress, but he stops her and tells her that she doesn't have to do this. Meanwhile, Dawnby is hiding in the other room, but the drug takes effect and she wanders towards them in a daze. The queen is shocked when her husband runs to catch Dawnby's fall. She storms out while the king tries to revive Dawnby and then struggles to contain her strange drunken antics. The following morning, Dawnby is mortified to wake up hugging the king's waist. He insists on walking her home and throws an arm around Dawnby to thank her for everything she's done for him lately. The king also adds that he's been able to breathe a little since her arrival. When they arrive at Dawnby's cottage, he suggests that they become friends, and she agrees happily before tossing him the tangerine, on which she drew a little face. As he leaves, Dawnby is startled when the little neighbor boy pops up to greet her with her bra on his head and calls her Nuna, which means sister. In the meantime, spies are watching from a distance and the queen's father decides to make an issue of Dawnby being with the king all night. They arrest her and take her to the king on grounds of high treason for belittling the queen. However, in her defense, the king shows them how Dawnby invented a system for measuring precipitation with her water cup. A minister who conspired with the queen's father speaks up to suggest that if Dawnby is really as skilled as the king thinks, then they should put her to the test. He says it would be truly useful if they could tell time without the sun. After her hearing, Dawnby overhears one of the king's trusted advisors telling him to throw her away. So, to make herself useful, she begins work on making a water clock to measure time without the sun. Suddenly, a raindrop falls from the sky, and the king's eyes widen in alarm. Dawnby feels the rain too, and they both remember what she said, that she'd go back home when the rain comes again. The king gets up and breaks into a full run as he dashes towards Dawnby in desperation. The latter also changes back into her school uniform and looks down into the puddle of water in the yard and tries dipping her toe in. The king runs as fast as he can, but when he arrives in the yard, it's empty. Turns out she's around the back, checking to see if her calculations work. The king finds her and Dawnby says that she thought she could make a water clock to measure time, an idea she had because of a leaky roof in her high school classroom. Her calculations are off though, and she says with tears in her eyes that she never tried so hard for anything in her entire life because she was always afraid that she'd try her best and then still fail. The king is in a hurry to put her on a boat because her life is at stake. However, Dawnby cries that she already ran away to this place and doesn't want to run anymore. What she needs is more time. They're interrupted by the swordsman, who comes to whisk her away to safety. Meanwhile, the queen is informed about the king running to save Dawnby, so she sneaks into his room. After a bit of digging around, she finds that he saved the tangerine given by Dawnby and concludes that he's in love with her. Elsewhere, the swordsman and Dawnby stop in the middle of the woods to take a rest. Unfortunately, he finds out that she in fact is a girl and blackmails her to keep it a secret from the king, but only if she pays double her room rent. Meanwhile, King Lidu learns of his advisor's order to kill Dawnby and rushes off on his horse to try and stop it. Back in the woods, assassins surround Dawnby and the swordsman. Hence, the latter sends her ahead on his horse while he fights off the assassins. Dawnby reaches the western shore by sunset, and soon the king arrives to meet her there. Her eyes well up with tears, and without a word he gets off his horse and marches over to her to kiss her. Later that night, Dawnby and King Lidu sit by a fire on the beach. She tries her water clock equation over and over all night long, and it's only when she goes to wash her face in the morning that she finds moss in the little pond. She realizes that her measuring equation didn't work the other day because of the moss. They then go back to the palace and Dawnby removes moss from her measuring equipment. When she tries that, it works like it's supposed to, and King Lidu is able to clear her of her charges. As days pass by, Dawnby even becomes friends with the queen over a midnight snack, and she decides to accept Dawnby as the king's lover. However, her father opposes it, but the queen has already begun preparations. In the next scene, we see that Dawnby is given a bath and dressed in a pretty dress. Dawnby asks what exactly the government position is that she's being awarded, and the court lady tells her that she's to spend a flower night with the king. Realizing that she has to be physically involved, Dawnby runs away, muttering that she isn't ready for such a ceremony. The king hears that she ran off and gives chase. After finding her, he pulls her into a gentle hug and jokingly reveals that he knows she's a woman. In a flashback, we see that he heard the little boy calling her Nuna the night he walked her home, and then again when he ran to look for her in the rain. He says he played along because he wanted to spend every possible moment with her, which would have been much harder if everyone knew the truth. The next day, the king takes out a hairpin he plans to give to Dawnby and practices asking her to stay with him. Dawnby is contemplating that very question herself, and just then, she is called to meet the Queen Mother. In a shocking turn of events, it is revealed that her actual mother's doppelganger is the Queen Mother. She breaks down into heaving sobs from missing her mom so much. When Dawnby goes to meet the king that night, she's back in her school uniform. She's amazed when he shows her the inner room that's lined ceiling to floor with words and sounds he's been testing out. He then sits her down to make his big proposal. He sticks the hairpin in her hair and says, "As long as the sun rises and sets, stay by my side." Dawnby takes it all in and then admits sorrowfully that she wants to go home when it rains. The reason is that she misses her mom a lot. She then takes the hairpin out and holds it out to him as tears trickle down the king's face. Devastated, he storms out, and as she watches him walk away, suddenly someone attacks her from behind and stabs her in the back. Assassins then light the room on fire, with Dawnby still inside. After learning about the incident, the king runs back and finds Dawnby lying on the ground. In the aftermath of the fire, the king addresses his court and names his trusted advisor as the culprit. Dawnby is alive and well thanks to her huge math textbook that was in her backpack. She can say without a doubt that the advisor was there last night because of her special knack for recognizing voices. Next, Dawnby returns her eunuch's robes in preparation to leave, and then gives the king a few pages out of her history book. It's a copy of the letters and words he would go on to invent. She tells him that he'll realize his dream and give the people a language, and because of him, all people in his era will come to read and write. With this, the king finally believes that she came from the future. Suddenly, they see clouds rolling in and realize that it's going to rain. Next, Dawnby says goodbye to the swordsman, who finally tells her that his name is Park Yeon. She recognizes his name as a musical genius of his generation and tells him not to give up on music. As a parting gift, she also hands him all of her gold. The king then takes Dawnby for one last horseback ride to the ocean. He picks her up so that her feet dangle above the ocean, opening up a portal below her feet. Dawnby drops right through the ocean, and just like that, she's gone. She then comes out the other side, right back to the exact spot and time she had left. This time, she rushes to the exam hall and makes it just in time. After the exam, she goes home and gives her mom a big hug. And then we see that in their family photo, her dad is the doppelganger of the minister who'd stood up for her in court. In the next scene, we learn that Dawnby ends up failing the college entrance exam and working part-time at a convenience store. She's enrolling in a tutoring academy to study for next year's exam. At the store, she notices that even the swordsman musician has a doppelganger in this world, and he's a singer on TV. One rainy day, Dawnby gets off the bus and thinks of King Lee-do wistfully. She's standing at a crosswalk when suddenly someone holds an umbrella over her head. She looks up, and there's a man who's the spitting image of King Lee-do standing there smiling at her. He says that they've run into each other before. That shocks her, but in a flashback, we see that he means the day of her college entrance exam. He'd been on the bus that day and noticed her, and he was the one who picked up her books and handed them to her, although she hadn't noticed his face. She ran off without her umbrella, which he took, and is holding over her right now. The movie ends with the two smiling at each other and realizing that they have met their soulmate.